Climb into the cockpit with pilot and Link Square's Chief Legal Officer, Tim Perilla, as he invites legal leaders aboard to share advice that will help you navigate even the most turbulent times of in-house counsel work. We'll cover a range of topics from data privacy to legal team structure to public company transactions and beyond. You don't want to miss this series. Fasten your seatbelt and prepare for takeoff. You're listening to Cockpit Counsel.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Cockpit Counsel. My name's Tim. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at Link Squares. With us, as always, is Alyssa Verzino, our producer. And today, joining us, we have Mosah Goodman. Mosah, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Tim and Alyssa. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here, listen to a lot of the episodes, and thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us. So we start out every episode the same way. What's your pre-flight ritual?
Yeah, that's an interesting question to start out with because as I was reflecting on it, I wasn't sure if I have one that I take for each sort of type of trip. I think if it's with my family, it's probably about taking the kids to the bathroom and making sure that, they have all the snacks that they need and, just being thrilled that I actually got to the right seat before it left without me. But if it's something that, I'm traveling independent or for business or to meet with a client, I have to say it's probably just like most people. It's staying hydrated and, making sure that I check my messages before I have to, famously turn your cell phones off for those 15 or 20 minutes that we can't be connected. So, with kids, it gets a little more adventurous, I guess.
Yeah, I can't imagine traveling. Obviously, I travel a lot and always see people traveling with their children, and I'm just in awe that people are able to do that and maintain some semblance of sanity.
Yeah, it's really more about fear of having to do the things that you'd have to do off the plane, on the plane that gets you to do that, right? So,
right.
Commercial bathrooms are not exactly a fun place to be. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about your career path and what you're up to now. We'd love to just hear a little bit about your background and, ultimately what brought you to focus on helping attorneys and executives career development.
Sure. Yeah. Well, just, I guess, a little bit about me and my background. I am an attorney. I grew up actually in New York and went to school on the East Coast, as we were talking about earlier. And I was a theater major as an undergrad, which is a little different than the philosophy or economics majors that probably dominate the legal field. I went to, a small liberal arts school in New England, and then spent some time doing fundraising work before going to law school and business school. After graduating from University of Iowa, go Hawks, I took a job in financial services and had a series of jobs in financial services in an in-house counsel capacity. And every time I made a move and every time I talked to my friends about their career moves and the process that they experienced and the challenges that they encountered and some of the wins that they were able to get, it seemed like there was a need to fill a gap. And that gap was serving and advocating for the actual candidate, the person seeking their next role. When I took the step to go to law school, it was probably a few years after Jerry Maguire had come out, and I was enamored with the concept of being a sports agent. And that sort of gives you some insight into, I guess, my mentality and approach to things is that I love trying to maximize opportunities for people. And when I guess, saw this as a need in the market, talking with my wife about the possibility of starting a business to help people do this type of work. It was that sort of innate passion to advocate, the training and discipline around being an attorney and seeing what seemed to be an underserved need in the market that kind of led me to start Top Talent Advocates. And it's been a great journey. We've been doing it for 8 years. We've helped a couple of hundred executives and attorneys during their job search all across the country and a few global placements. So it's the other side of the recruiting equation. And I still fist bump and get excited when we get people the roles that they want and into the cultures that they love to work in and the compensation that they deserve. So it's both passion and a great business to be in. So love it.
That's awesome. So, all right, you've been at it for 8 years, your own company. How many people do you have working with you?
Yeah, good question. I do most of the client service work. We've grown, and I do have a few people that support me in the business from a marketing and business development perspective. One who does it almost exclusively full time in the business, and I think you know her, Alyssa, Lindsay. We've gone back and forth with her, and she's wonderful. And we're growing the business together, and we have some support from contractors. So it's very much boutique.
That's awesome. That's the best business people have that boutique mentality, right? It is a relatively sort of unique thing to be excellent at. It's not something that lends itself to being systematically trained and developed. I think you really have to have a talent and a passion that is hard to instill for somebody who's just like looking for another job.
Yeah, I don't know that we would write a job posting, right? If we found the right person to bring us in, we bring into the org, we would probably do it. But no, I think that's a fair assessment of it. We're looking at a few ways to actually leverage technology to make us a little more efficient. But when it's someone's career and it's there every day, you want to make sure you're supporting them in the way they need to. And right now, that's still one-on-one.
Yeah, absolutely. I also I think it's hilarious, the reference to Jerry Maguire. I think between Jerry Maguire, A Few Good Men, and probably any number of the John Grisham books turned movies, most people who went to law school, it was because of a movie, right?
You can handle the truth, show me the money, right? You've got a million free quotes. Yeah.
That's right. So, or like, you think about a civil action with Danny DeVito, hilarious. And then, of course they have to be movies and they have to be sensationalized because 90%, probably more than 90% of actually practicing law is nowhere near as exciting as those movies made it seem.
And at the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got the My Cousin Vinny's, right?
That's right. So let's talk about the market. What's the job market like right now for attorneys and execs looking to make moves?
Yeah, well, I guess I'd answer that just generally. We see in a typical year, we'll see a cycle of something that is obvious when you hear it, but may not be as apparent if you're looking for your next role. Is that there's a general pattern to hiring. Which is something like Q1 jobs post or budgets become available. And this is because most, companies have a calendar fiscal. Q2, they become real or interviewed or filled for. And Q3, they backfill. And Q4 tends to be the doldrum of hiring. So depending on when this episode airs and where people are, that tends to be the general cycle in most years. I would say that for our in-house counsel clients, for the folks who all too often, and I'd say entirely unfairly, get branded as really expensive overhead, the market is probably tightening a little bit more so than we had seen. So it's really even more incumbent upon individuals to make the case for their candidacy and their value add to an organization, which is what we coach our clients through, is demonstrating that value that they're bringing to employers. Because attorneys vary significantly. I was looking at a post that you put out there, Tim, I think it was a couple of days ago, about, the actual value that attorneys are bringing is not one. I forget your exact phrasing, but you had a post that alluded to making sure that attorneys understand their value and aren't just the department of no or risk avoidance. If they're interested in doing that, they can basically go back to a law firm. I'm paraphrasing. That was something that you put out there. Yeah, I think that rings true when you're looking for a job as well, or that sentiment rings true, and that you really need to demonstrate your business acumen and your ability to deliver results, ideally on the commercial, on the commercial side. So the market is tightening. We saw an interesting boom and bust in the COVID years, I would say, sort of threw things off cycle. But there's still plenty of opportunities in the in-house market. You just really need to make sure that you're moving for the right reasons, and moving to the right place, but that in order to get those opportunities, you're presenting as compelling cases you can. On the law firm side, it's becoming increasingly important, and this is as business cycles ebb and flow. Firms have been hiring I wouldn't say recklessly, but almost freely, about 18 to 24 months ago. And the book of business and the value proposition for long-term economic viability of your contribution to a firm couldn't be any more important than it is today. So firms are really looking at that. For our executive clients, non-lawyers, it's really about, the same thing it always is. Are you going to help us grow and make money and avoid the risks that our legal department isn't focused on? So,
right. Yeah. It's difficult when you start looking at the executive level hiring, and top leadership, even within the legal team. There just aren't that many CFO roles out there, right? You only have one per company. And so unless that person is leaving for one reason or another, it's tough to find those.
Yeah, I mean, I'll use a football analogy, right? You're only going to have one quarterback, and for any of those C-suite positions, right, there's only one person who's taking a snap on any given play. Now, you do need backups, and you need people in training and waiting, but you're right. I mean, it's the top of the pyramid. Yep.
So, thinking about progression within legal careers, particularly with the focus on in-house. What are some words of wisdom that you can give to people who are just early on in their in-house career? How do you advance? How do you make yourself marketable for that next job? Any tips, tricks, hints?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think it depends on how you start off in-house, and where you're coming from. If you're, I would say, the more traditional and typical fast riser, you're coming from a law firm and you're moving to an in-house capacity, either because a client saw that you'd be a great fit for them and asked you to come work for them. Perhaps you've done a secondment and you want to be high, it makes more sense to bring you in, or simply you're not interested in the long-term career at a firm and you'd prefer to move in-house. But for whatever reason, I think what I've seen happen with so many clients is the attractiveness of, or the mystique of going in-house might not be fully understood by people at any moment in their career until they actually make that move. And so I think it's really important that people, first off, make a move into in-house roles for the right reasons. We can talk about what those are if you or your listeners are interested in it.
Yeah.
So I would start there to understand why people are making that move. But to answer your question as succinctly as possible, if people are interested in advancing, it's figuring out ways to add value that are meaningful. And what I mean by meaningful is understanding what your company or your organization or your nonprofit values and delivering towards those results, which might not be, to your reference your post again, avoid every risk in the world. Right? It might be, let's set up a way to enable the business. Let's set up a way to enable our mission. Making sure that you're really clear on that. That's your job as in-house counsel. And people who do that and get that earlier in their careers tend to rise quicker.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think it's it's interesting. We talk a lot about it on the show, but in-house should be viewed as a completely separate practice area, as distinct as patent filing attorneys versus, civil plaintiff's attorney work, right? Like it really does require a unique skill set. The things that make you successful at a law firm, if you come in-house and try to do those things in that same way, probably not going to give you the greatest results.
No, totally agree. One more thing to add to it. is that I think the requirements and the benefits of how people can advantage themselves in their in-house careers is really changing as a result of technology. I'm just starting now to hear from clients, I need to better understand contract management software. I need to better understand ways to make my department more efficient, make sure that we're managing billing correct. So those types of things and those types of skill sets, many of which, companies like yours at LinkSquares address, are becoming new skill sets in the arena. And people who understand that and study it and become experts in it are only enhancing their value and therefore their professional opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think no matter what your business is, the amount of integration of technology into your business is just increasing with time. And I think that legal teams have avoided it for as long as possible, and not necessarily, like, I don't want it to sound like it was a conscious, I don't want to do this, but they just really didn't have quality tools that they could easily economically use, right? Like, there have been a lot of tools that have been around for a while, but they're really expensive. And a lot of companies look at in-house attorneys as more or less a cost center. I think that's wrong. And I think that the right attorneys in-house can show the business and the leadership why that's not the right perspective, and that a legal team can be more than a cost center. It can actually drive business results. But that really is how people have looked at in-house legal teams historically. And so the idea of giving them even more money to now go spend on technology, it was really a difficult thing. So there just wasn't that truly affordable solution that could provide step functions up in capability for the legal team itself.
Totally agree. I think, without making it sound almost cartoonish, but how on resumes you used to see people write proficient in Microsoft Word and Excel. Yeah. Well, there's a whole new crop of technology, right, that companies like yours are working to address. And if the future GC, CLO, CCOs of the world aren't becoming proficient in the moral equivalents, you're going to get left behind, right? You're not giving yourself, and you're not giving your client ultimately every advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. So you touched on it a little bit. I'd love to go back to it. What are the right reasons for going in-house, and what are the wrong ones?
Yeah. The wrong one is simply not having the right reasons and not having given thought to what comes next. I think that's the primary thing that I hear from clients who more and more are reconsidering after short stints in-house the possibility of going back to a law firm, which is somewhat of an anomaly in most people's career paths. But I think with the ever sort of increasing availability of, I would say, not necessarily clickbait or the moral equivalent of it, but I would say the exuberance around people's interest in making in the other, right, and leaving the world of hourly billing and leaving the need to produce clients. Sometimes you're running towards a whole new set of issues. And that really gets to your point on ultimately sometimes being viewed as a cost center, not having an interest or an ability, perhaps even, or the background and knowledge to add the commercial value that a company is hiring you for. Just because you were a really great law student and you were hired by an AM Law 50 or, and even the AM Law 200, it means that you're a smart person who works hard and can synthesize a lot of information. It doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to advise someone in real time on a risk-adjusted business decision. And I think that's the trade-off, is not necessarily understanding the role significantly. Now, the exact opposite holds true, I think, for a lot of our clients, which is that if you really don't enjoy the practice of law in an outside counsel setting, and you should have been someone who went to business school, and you should have been someone who started your own business in your 20s and that sort of entrepreneurial mindset, or someone who really just thinks in terms of dollars and cents and moving an organization forward, then that's the right person to leverage the background and training that you've had as an attorney or as outside counsel and move in-house, because it's that type of pre-qualifier that's going to enable you to rise in an area of specialty. But it's also the necessary motivation and interest and healthy curiosity that's going to allow you to drive forward within a business or another form of organization.
I've seen a handful of folks do the move from a firm, go in-house, and then go back to a firm. And I think two things have been pretty consistent behind the reasoning that those people have had. First, they go in-house because they think it's going to be less hours. And then they're also okay with the paycheck because they think it's going to be less hours. And then they get in and realize that, yeah, maybe you're not billing and maybe it is somewhat fewer hours, right? Maybe you're not working, and COVID obviously has changed a lot of this. Like a lot of your big law firms would have showers and cots, and you take a few hours of a nap and you get right back at it. You're like, and that was life for a lot of, junior associates trying to do what they need to do. And so when you realize you're still working 60-hour weeks, you're still working 65-hour weeks, sometimes 70-hour weeks, and you're getting paid meaningfully less money, like you're just like, all right, well, if I'm going to be working just as hard, I may as well get paid more for it. Right. And so those two things, like the expectations around what life is like, it's like, yeah, you're not billing hours, but it's just different work.
There's also a whole different risk profile, right? And when you're outside counsel, you are a revenue generator. You are the business, right?
That's right.
People are paying for. And when you move in-house, hopefully your clients develop enough trust and respect for your work product and the function as a whole that they view it the same way. But I have to tell you that that's not always the case. And, your ability to drive your own fiscal return is pretty formulaic in most law firms, or at least you have a general sense of how you're going to perform based on what you bill and generate. And when you move in-house, you're subject to the whims of quarterly earnings in a publicly traded company. And
that's right.
How you move up within your pay scale and pay a whole different set of opportunities, admittedly, because you can make really great money in-house in a lot of our clients. Sure. But it's wildly different.
Yeah, it is. It's a completely different world. And one of the other things I think that can be challenging for folks, particularly like partners who are coming in, is that a lot of law firm partners want to come in to their first in-house job and be the top lawyer because they don't want to work for somebody else. And, some people are able to do that effectively. A lot of people are not. And it is because it's a very, very different environment. It's a very, you have to be a business leader. If you're actually that top attorney, you're more of a business leader than you are a lawyer.
Yep. And I don't know your view on this. It'd be really, I'm genuinely interested in it, but I think that when people are outside counsel or when they're in a firm, they're thinking about how do they manage their book of business and their practice, right? How do they grow the practice? Or how do they fit it within their practice and politics? When you move in-house, you're really managing your career and learning industry networks. And it's unlikely that you're going to start and stop at one corporation. So making sure that you understand you've now taken on a different set of responsibilities of sort of personal or professional management is something that needs to be contemplated before that shift gets made.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's spot on. And your career trajectory is not as linear, I guess, as it is in a law firm. Law firm, you're an associate, you work really hard, promoted to a senior associate, then junior partner, and the partner and equity partner, depending on the structure of your firm, whatever that looks like. And that's the career path. And you're either up or you're out. Yeah. That's it.
Yep.
When you're working in-house, there are all sorts of different directions you can go. You obviously could, like, if you come in and you're working for somebody else, like, yeah, you want to sort of climb that corporate ladder as much as you can. And that's one path. Or, you know what, maybe you start and you're the first attorney at a small company, and then you go to a slightly bigger company with a slightly bigger team, and then another company that's slightly bigger or in a different industry or whatever it may be. And you're absolutely trying to manage your career a little bit differently because, I mean, let's be honest about it. Nobody likes to work for free. No one's going to work for free. And not saying that money is everything, because it's not, right? But it's got to be there and it's got to be fair. And you need, as a professional, it's not just lawyers, everybody, like it or not, money is the way that the company tells you you're valued. And if you feel as though you are not valued fairly, you're going to be looking for someplace else to go. And that is your career management, right? So taking that approach of being able to, being able to go across different companies, different profiles of in-house legal teams, learn from different people. And a lot of in-house attorneys end up getting out of the legal teams altogether. Tons of folks in business development, a lot of CFOs as well, have law degrees, which was kind of crazy for me when I really started to realize that. But interesting no less. So like there are a lot of different career paths that are open to you when you do have that law degree and you get a little bit of in-house business experience behind you. It creates these cracks that you can kind of weasel your way into, as lawyers tend to do.
Absolutely. And there's, a lot of folks also segue into or come explicitly into say a chief compliance officer track role, right? Compliance, particularly financial services and pharma. And anything that's highly regulated will tend to have that focus. There's also, I remember I was working with a general counsel in the energy industry, and he said, well, I don't like to hire people who don't have at least 10 years of outside counsel experience. I said, well, why do you think of, what's that threshold? And he said, well, because every year of outside counsel experience is the equivalent of 2 years in terms of legal practice of being in-house. And while I understand that there's different responsibilities and different skills being cultivated in either type of setting, I don't think that's an entirely fair analogy, because the skills that are required in-house or necessarily appropriate, the skills that are required in-house are just very different. But they're, you're battling that assumption. So my point in saying that is that when you get off the outside counsel track, assuming you're moving that way, also matters. Thinking about how much time you've committed to developing your craft. 1 to 2 years will be viewed very differently than later in your career by some.
That's an interesting perspective that that person has. Seems to be over-indexing on quality of substantive legal work, and far be it from me to judge whether that's appropriate or not. My experience has been that, yes, you have to be good, you have to be competent, and it is the responsibility of the leadership of the legal team to make sure that the quality of legal work that's put out is at the top, right? Is equivalent to that which you would get from a law firm. It needs to be, right? To say that you can't develop that in-house, or to say that it takes a certain number of years, I think is, probably more of a filter than it is a hard and fast rule, right? And so, but I mean, looking at that, 10 years, all right, now you're going to pay somebody who is probably relatively inept in terms of understanding what it means to practice in-house, who you're paying a lot of money to. Like a lot of money for someone who has the amount of legal expertise that chances are if you ever need that amount of legal expertise, you're going to go hire a firm for it anyway. And is more or less an infant when it comes to figuring out how to deal with what it means to practice in-house, right? It just, my mind immediately goes to the economics behind that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're bringing in someone who you're going to have to deal with and handhold for a long time. And you're going to be paying them just a lot of money. That doesn't sound like something that's that appealing. But again, every business is different. And particularly if you're looking in regulated industries, I get it. I worked in one for 8 years. Like I know how it goes, and I know how sort of foot faults can be problematic. So knowing that your attorneys on staff are subject matter experts can bring you some comfort where the premium sometimes. I get it.
What is the size of the organization? There are a multitude of factors. I brought that up just because it has always stuck with me, and I think it sparks conversations and insights like the one that you just shared. So I agree with you.
Awesome. And Mosah, you have your own podcast, so would love to hear about Hiring Insights and how you got started doing that.
Yeah, well, I don't have two mics like that. That's awesome. Well, it was, so the podcast is called Hiring Insights. It focuses on executive and legal hiring. And it really, the goal of the podcast is to, I guess, peek behind the curtain, if you will, on what it takes not only to manage your own career. And there have been a number of guests who've shared, in fact, almost every guest has shared their own professional journey, but to try to understand what happens with things as mundane as submitting an online application to a job, to what is a chief human resource officer thinking about as they're hiring their next boss into a CEO role. What does that look like? What are the expectations and types of interview questions that you can really get tripped up on as a GC or CLO candidate? And speaking plainly with recruiters to understand what they do and what they don't do in someone's hiring process. So it's kind of the goal of the podcast is to really, I guess, again, peek behind the curtain and ask the questions that people that they want to have asked but haven't had answered in their search process.
That's amazing. And what's some of the most the most interesting insight that you've gotten that can be translated into a piece of advice for our listeners?
So I was fortunate enough to have Bill George as my first guest on the podcast. And some of you may know Bill, and, he's got a massive LinkedIn following. He's the former CEO of Medtronic, and he's been on the board of Goldman Sachs and Target. And, he's professor at Harvard. He's a great guy. He's a philanthropist. He's written countless business books. And he gave some advice that I thought was really very very insightful and especially poignant for executives. He said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, I think he actually was quoting someone else. He said that, this is from one of his books where he's interviewing executives. He says, we were historically trained to work with our hands, and then we were trained to use our minds. And today's executives are trained to use their hearts. And without sounding mushy or without sounding overly emotional about it, what he was basically walking us through was sort of, the industrial era all the way through to modern times where we're using artificial intelligence, and people's EQ and the ability to navigate, whether you're moving in-house the politics of a corporation, you're managing, client relationships as outside counsel, connecting on a human level and being able to understand what drives people and what motivates them, and how to be just genuinely good in relationships, I think was one of the better pieces of advice. There've been a lot of practical and I would say tactical insights, but that is one of the guests' comments that's really stuck with me.
That's great.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I like that.
Very cool. All right. Well, we end every episode with some rapid fire questions. So we'll dive into those.
Okay.
All right. So the first one is, what is your hot take on setting career goals?
that I think too often people don't do them. You can never really fully predict or plan for the future, but without any type of plan, you're leaving your future to chance. And so to have career goals and to be able to focus on and have something you can't manage what you can't measure. So to have something that you can measure with some degree of flexibility is important in everyone's, everyone's personal planning. And I would try to look 5 to 10 years out.
Nice. What is your number one LinkedIn tip for someone looking for a new role?
Pay it forward. Too often people will post content that is self-serving or will be searching for ways to connect with or take advantage, not necessarily in a nefarious way, but take advantage of a connection. The most successful stories that I've personally had and the most successful stories or experiences that I've had and stories that I've heard from others is when people engage in other people's content, when they reference what other people are saying, when they repost really meaningful things and say why it was meaningful to them about someone else's accolades. Paying it forward is a really good thing to do. It builds the community on, particularly within the legal community online. I think it's pretty tight knit. And it gives people an opportunity, again, to build George's point, to understand sort of where your heart is on issues. You don't need to get into the sex, politics, or religion conversations, but letting people understand who you are will make the times when you do need people to support you or advocate for you that much more meaningful and likely.
That's a great answer. What is one way that listeners can stand out during an interview?
You'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be, at how few people do their homework. If you're taking your own time and you're asking others to take time to be interested in you as potentially someone they want to work with for years, because the roles that we're talking about are not short-lived roles. Most of the folks that I work with will hold a position for 3 to 7 years at a minimum. You want to make sure that you are prepared not only to put your best foot forward, but also that you are doing your own homework in those interviews, because that often, other than knowing people who work in an organization, is your best opportunity to source where you may be spending time, and time is our most precious commodity.
Great answers. Thank you.
Mosah, it was really awesome having this conversation. It was great to get to know you a little bit here. And we're going to have you come out to Boston and we'll do one of these live and in person. And for everyone listening, if you like this, give us a like, give us a follow on all the socials, and we will see you next time. Thanks.